It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast. We are presented by DraftKings. Love those guys. Love my co-host, Joe Dolan, at FG_Dolan on social media. He, of course, one of the owners over at fantasypoints.com. I am unaware of any website that provides more information than they do. I mean, they got betting stuff, fantasy stuff, DFS stuff, the data suite. It's unbelievable. Make sure you go to fantasypoints.com. But when you do that, use the code 23FEAST so they know that I sent you or we sent you or whatever. I think you know I'm Ross Tucker. At Ross Tucker NFL is my social media. Today on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, we will have the civilian GOAT, Greg Cosell. Highly recommend, by the way, you check out the last couple episodes. Tuesday, Power Rankings. How about Wednesday? All the situations where these teams are going for two and why, like Vrabel, like Doug Peterson. Steve Fezzik was all over that, the probability expert, and also the Even Money Betting Podcast co-host on Wednesday's Ross Tucker Football Podcast. As a reminder, you can always check out the show on YouTube, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. And I said this on one of the other shows. If you order a story for a loved one from myfrontpagestory.com within the next week, send me the email, ross@rosstucker.com. I will send you a signed press pass in the mail, which is pretty cool. What is cool about the Texans and the Titans, Joe, as we sit here recording this Wednesday morning?
Not a whole lot right now because I need to figure out what's going on with the CJ Stroud situation. He's obviously in the concussion protocol. And if CJ Stroud doesn't play, Davis Mills, who is Davis Mills throwing to? We know Tank Dell is out for the season. So Nico Collins is dealing with what appears to be an aggravation of the calf injury that he had earlier this season. So does Nico Collins go? All of a sudden, the Texans, which, you know, we're looking like, oh, geez, Tank Dell was a huge hit in the draft, and Nico Collins is breaking out, and they have Dalton Schultz, and this supporting cast that we thought at the beginning of the year was going to rival Carolina's for one of the worst in the league was really something that all of a sudden you're looking at as one of the better young cores of pass catchers. They don't have those guys right now. So Dalton Schultz has been injured and missed a couple of games. Nico Collins is hurt. Tank Dell we know is out for the year, and we don't know who's throwing the football. So other than that, you know, we have a whole clear picture of what's going on in this game. We are recording this on Wednesday. So you obviously have information that we don't when you're listening to this about Nico Collins. If Collins got in a limited practice or CJ Stroud gets in a limited practice on Wednesday, we probably feel better against the Texans going against this Titan defense, which has been a pass funnel kind of defense this year. If not, you have to downgrade all of your Texans across the board.
What about the Titans? They were kind of feisty there at the end of that game against the Dolphins. Will Levis looking jacked, hitting guys. I mean, Hopkins, Henry, Levis.
Yeah.
What are you thinking, Joe?
Well, I think Hopkins and Henry are must-starts at this point. You know, Henry, he only averaged 2 yards a carry, but he got in the box twice, which is certainly going to help matters. And Henry, that was a game where you're probably not playing him a ton, in DFS at least, because you expected them to get blown out. They won as basically 2 touchdown underdogs. You know, Will Levis, look, 327, he ran for 15 yards. I'm actually a little disappointed he's not running a little bit more for fantasy, but he's kind of viable if you need somebody who's going to go out there and run around. And, you know, you have to take into account that he might turn the ball over a couple of times, but I've been pretty impressed with Will Levis. Tyjae Spears, though, 6 catches for 89 yards out of that backfield. He also added 29 yards as a runner. You know, he had 17 fantasy points. He is the kind of guy who, in a negative game script, you start to say, hey, look, man, I can put this guy in my lineup and he can produce for me. The problem, of course, is we don't know what's going on with these Texans skill players. So the Titans are currently favored, which indicates a positive and good game script for Derrick Henry in this game.
Joe, let's talk Chiefs at the Patriots.
Look, I think you can explain a lot of it away with the receivers and all that stuff. Patrick Mahomes has to be better than that, Ross. Like, I mean, come on. Like, please, like, show a little bit of self-awareness. Like Patrick Mahomes hasn't gotten a friendly whistle at points in his career in some of the biggest games that he's played in. Like, come on. Get over yourself, buddy. And I understand he came out, he apologized and all that stuff. But what it is a frustration with Patrick Mahomes. It's not so easy to be the magician that he is when he doesn't have his trusty assistants that he can saw in half at a whim, you know? Travis Kelce looks human this year. Rashee Rice is a great player, but he's a rookie, and he's just got nothing on the outside. And then, without Isaiah Pacheco, they didn't have a running game against Buffalo. So Mahomes was basically doing it all himself, so I understand why he was frustrated. Let's keep an eye on Isaiah Pacheco's status. They didn't put him on IR. If Pacheco can't go, this is probably a better spot with the Chiefs as heavy favorites against New England, 9.5 on the road for Clyde Edwards-Helaire than it is for Jerick McKinnon. The problem for me is I just don't think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is very good, and I actually think Jerick McKinnon is pretty good. McKinnon got the touchdown last week, and he topped 12 fantasy points in a PPR, which you were probably pretty happy with if you started him. But for right now, I mean, for the most part, if Pacheco doesn't play, the Chiefs have 3 must-start guys, Mahomes, Kelce, and Rice. And Mahomes, you know, I think almost certainly you're in a spot where you have to start him, but there are fantasy quarterbacks out there who you're ranking above Patrick Mahomes right now. It's just given the state of the position, probably not likely that you have 2 of them on the same team.
Anybody for the Patriots, Joe? Maybe Hunter Henry?
There's one. I'm not going back to Hunter Henry. I can't trust him. If you want to, by all means, have fun. There's one guy on the New England Patriots. Ezekiel Elliott. 22 carries, 8 targets last week. 30 opportunities for Zeke against the Steelers. There is a legitimate league-winning potential for Ezekiel Elliott. I don't expect Ramondre Stevenson to play again this year. I don't think he should with him with a high ankle sprain. He had every single carry out of the backfield for them last week. Every single one. You have to start Ezekiel Elliott. It might look like Zach Moss. You know, Zach Moss, we talked on yesterday's podcast. He's been getting all the opportunities and hasn't been scoring. But again, in season-long fantasy football, if a guy is going to get 20 touches, you have to play that guy. Zeke Elliott is going to get 20 touches in this game.
Let's talk Niners at the Cardinals, Joe.
Okay, so I mean, the Niners are just as easy as it gets. They're a much more interesting team to talk about on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast and how amazing that Shanahan scheme is than they are on this podcast, quite frankly. Because on this podcast, I tell you the same thing every week. You start Debo, you start Ayuk, you start Kittle, you start McCaffrey. Oh, and by the way, all 4 of those guys came through this week. And Brock Purdy, now here is one of those quarterbacks who I was talking about, who it's unlikely you have 2 quarterbacks on the same team that you'd consider starting one ahead of Patrick Mahomes. I'd have a hard time sitting Brock Purdy for Patrick Mahomes right now. The efficiency, the weapons, the scheme, he's got everything Patrick Mahomes doesn't have in terms of players around him. And Kyle Shanahan is completely in his bag. I don't know, like with knowing what Brock Purdy's upside is, 368 and 2 touchdowns last week. Why I don't know how many guys I can sit him for. Dak Prescott is a guy who I'd be starting over Brock Purdy every week. Probably Jalen Hurts, just because of the rushing upside, but we'll talk about the Eagles. Their offense has been tough to watch at times in terms of scheme. I mean, I don't know how many guys I feel like 1,000% confident I'm starting over Brock Purdy. Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen and Dak Prescott might be the only two quarterbacks in fantasy football I am 100% confident starting over Brock Purdy at this point. That's it.
Joe, what about the Arizona Cardinals? Trey McBride, James Conner.
Love Trey McBride. And I can't wait to use him this week because I have a 14-team league, Ross, where I've been making the wrong decision when I've had this opportunity between Dalton Kincaid and Kyle Pitts every single week. I don't have to worry about it this week because I'm just starting Trey McBride. Get him in there. Tight. He is. It's like Kelsey and then McBride right now. Maybe Kittle up there. That's it with how Trey McBride has been putting up numbers. Kyler is a low-end quarterback one. He just doesn't have a ton of weapons. Hollywood Brown has done nothing. He's been banged up too. And James Conner's a bell cow running back. So right now it's McBride and Conner for sure, and Kyler and Hollywood maybe, depending on your lineup.
What about the Commanders and the Rams? Rams feel pretty narrow, Joe.
They are. Kyron Williams, listen to this. I mean, could there be a better week for Kyron Williams to be part of your fantasy team than this week? Kyron has been spectacular. He was already looking like an insane league winner with his volume. Since returning from injury, he's posted 22, 26, and 29 opportunities for 21.2 expected fantasy points per game. That's first among running backs who've played all 3 games over that span. He's part of a Ram offense now that is going against a Commanders defense that over the last 5 weeks has allowed a league-high 7.8 schedule-adjusted fantasy points per game over expectation to running backs as receivers alone. It is a massive spot for Kyron Williams this week as 6.5-point favorites against the Commanders. And then, I think Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, all also in play this week against the Commanders. This is a defense that can be picked on, and I love having my Rams in this matchup.
What about, Joe, the Commanders on offense?
So Sam Howell is one of the NFL's leading passers, and Terry McLaurin didn't catch a pass in their last game. It's really hard to describe Sam Howell. Now look, Sam Howell just threw for 127 against the Dolphins in their last game, so he didn't play very well. I think the Rams have a much easier defense to play against than the Dolphins do at this stage. But what's going on with Terry McLaurin? The guy doesn't have a 100-yard receiving game this year, with Sam Howell being in the mix to lead the NFL in passing yards? Seriously? It's driving me nuts, because if you were to tell me Terry McLaurin would stay healthy and Sam Howell would lead the NFL in passing, I would have taken Terry McLaurin in the second round of fantasy drafts. And it just hasn't happened in that regard. Curtis Samuel has really been the guy who's benefited from Sam Howell's pass-heavy tendency, and they might have to be pass-heavy this week. They're 6.5-point underdogs, and Brian Robinson picked up a hamstring injury in their last game. So by the time you're listening to this, you know what Brian Robinson's practice status on Wednesday was. I don't at this point. But you would think it's potentially a big Antonio Gibson game with Brian Robinson dinged up and the Commanders 7-point underdogs.
Joe, we're sponsored by DraftKings.
I do.
I love DraftKings. In the NBA, the game can change in an instant. But no matter how the action unfolds, DraftKings Sportsbook has your back. This week, new customers can score $150 instantly in bonus bets just for betting $5 on basketball. Win or lose, you get an instant dub. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code ROSS. New customers can get $150 instantly in bonus bets for betting just $5 on basketball. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code ROSS. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NEW YORK or text HOPE-NY. In West Virginia, visit www.1800gambler.net. Please play responsibly. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, must be 21 or older in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. See DraftKings.com sportsbook for details and state-specific responsible gambling resources. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. Terms of sportsbook.com. DraftKings.com/basketball terms. Dude, that's the fastest I've ever read in my life.
Ross? That was your best busy bone impression I could have possibly imagined. So good. I'm good on you, Ross. I love it. Thank you for that
was
incredible
as fast
performance.
as I could possibly do that. All right, let's talk How about them Cowboys and the Buffalo Bills? I'm excited for this
Yeah,
one.
this is a good one. Dallas is rolling right now. No resistance from that Philly defense in the first half, and then some bad turnovers by the Eagles, and the Cowboys really won comfortably. Meanwhile, Buffalo, all of a sudden, they beat Kansas City on an extremely correct call, by the way. Of all the penalties that we have every week, Ross, and that we argue about, it's so funny that the most controversial one was probably the single most correct call I've seen all season. But Buffalo wins that game. And Miami then loses as 2 touchdown favorites on Monday Night Football, opening just that slight window for Buffalo, which was really on the outside looking in, and I believe still is on the outside looking in of a playoff spot. Now all of a sudden, you've got the Cowboys at home, the Cowboys coming off an emotional game against Philadelphia, and now Buffalo gets them at home in maybe some conditions. I'm excited for this game. And the thing about the Cowboys here, you look at the fact that the Eagles offense didn't score a touchdown in that game. But did the Eagles offense not score a touchdown because of the Cowboys defense, or did the Eagles offense not score a touchdown because they couldn't get out of their own way? Fumbles by Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Smith. You have an uncharacteristic drop in the end zone by Devontae Smith in that game. The Cowboys allowed 6 yards per play. Against better competition this year, this Cowboys defense has been, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying it's been gettable. And I think the Buffalo Bills should be able to move the ball and put numbers on the Dallas Cowboys in this game. And just one player I want to throw out is James Cook. The Bills' offense has changed in a key way under Joe Brady, and they're getting Cook more involved in the passing game. Over the last 3 weeks, Cook has 14 receptions for 169 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is a total playmaker, and I can't believe it took the Bills this long to figure it out. But James Cook is a weekly starter right now. The question is, will Stephon Diggs bounce back from some brutal matchups and, quite frankly, a tough game? In the past few matchups, he's played the Jets, he's been shadowed by Patrick Surtain, and he's been shadowed by L'Jarius Sneed, and he also had a bunch of awful drops against the Chiefs as well. Let's see if Stephon Diggs can bounce back in this week against Dallas.
Looking forward to that game for sure. By the way, Joe, just out of curiosity, who do you think wins that game?
I think the Bills win. I think it's because of the spot that they're in. I think the Bills are going to win at home and angle themselves towards the postseason. For Dallas, by the way, Ross, look, we know what Dallas is at this point from a fantasy perspective. It's kind of concerning that Rico Dowdle has been taking touches from Tony Pollard in the first half and on early downs. So that's been a concern. Tony Pollard, with Dallas's offense rolling, has just not been the fantasy asset we thought he was going to be. He did catch 7 passes last week, which certainly helps.
Joe, before we get to the Ravens and the Jags, 2 quick things. Number 1, we are going into the fourth quarter of this podcast. And in football, the fourth quarter is where the magic happens. It's where games are won, where champions are made. In business, it's where sales teams become legends. That's why HubSpot built Sales Hub, to give sales reps the deal-making tools they need to win their Q4. Sales Hub's prospecting workspace organizes your schedule, goals, and to-do list in one place to save your team precious fourth quarter time. Smart sequences help sales reps close deals faster than ever. So get ready to dominate Q4 with Sales Hub. Learn more at HubSpot.com/sales. By the way, you need something to wash down your sales with, Joe. So drink some Labatt Blue Lights as you're getting your fourth quarter sales in. If you really want to take things to the next level, drink some Labatt Blue Lights with your friends and live life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Which is a good time to talk about Buffalo, New York after we talked about the Bills and the Cowboys. Isn't it kind of funny, by the way? The Bills win one game, and now it's like talking about them going to the Super Bowl.
Well, I think part of the reason is, and I mean, obviously you have to have a take these days, but I think part of the reason is you look at the state of the quarterback position and how many guys right now in their current form do you take over Josh Allen in a one-game scenario? And the answer might be 0 right now, So I think that's part of the reason why.
What about, Joe, the Ravens?
Yeah. Maybe
We're
maybe
starting
this
to
is
look
one
at the Ravens without Mark Andrews at the Jaguars. Huge game, Sunday Night Football. We got another really good Sunday 4:25, Cowboys Bills, Sunday 8:20, Ravens Jags. The Monday night game we'll get to, but let's talk Ravens Jags.
Yeah, this might be one of those guys I would take no questions asked over Brock Purdy for fantasy. I forgot to mention him a little earlier, but that being Lamar Jackson. Even though he's been a little bit up and down, but he's been kind of winning the Ravens games. I don't want to say by himself, but the way he's mixing the ball around. 10 targets to Zay Flowers, 10 to Odell Beckham, 7 to Isaiah Likely. Oh, and he leads them in rushing as well. Lamar's playing at an MVP level, and I think if he's going to vault himself into that conversation, a primetime game against the Jaguars is going to be an opportunity for him to do so. A Jaguar team that, by the way, just got cooked by Joe Flacco for 311 passing yards. It's a big game for Lamar Jackson on Sunday night. I am seeing it. And if you need him, I think Baltimore has done a very good job being judicious with their usage of Odell Beckham. And while he's not the Odell Beckham that looked like a Hall of Famer early in his career, he can still put a move on a guy in the open field, as you saw in that long touchdown reception he had against the Rams last week. I think he's a viable wide receiver 3 right now, is Odell Beckham. Unbelievable to say. Oh, and fortunately, if you blew your fab budget replacing Mark Andrews with Isaiah Likely, he has been everything you could have wanted. He is a tight end 1. I expect that to continue this week.
You think he's that good?
I mean, I don't think he's Mark Andrews good, but I think he's that good for fantasy. Yes. I was a little worried they'd mix in Charlie Kolar. That has not been the case at all.
Seemed like to me, by the way, there were several downs where Lamar was holding on to the ball like he didn't have his security blanket in Andrews. What about the Jags offensively? Trevor Lawrence went from the Monday night looking like he might never walk again to playing against the Browns on Sunday.
Yeah, and he threw 3 picks. Didn't look himself, but he's going to be out there, you would think, on Sunday Night Football. And the Ravens are a defense you can attack on the perimeter. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp went for basically 200 yards between the two of them. I think Calvin Ridley is going to have an opportunity to have a strong game this week against the Baltimore Ravens if Trevor Lawrence is able to stay up. The problem here for the Jaguars is their run game has really struggled of late. And after a huge first half for Kyren Williams against the Ravens last week, he got kind of shut down in the second half. I think if Travis Etienne's going to get it done this week, it's going to have to be.
All right, Joe. Monday night. It's the Eagles and the Seahawks. What do we need to know?
Well, the Eagles just, I first and foremost, I buy into the fact that they're probably both physically and mentally exhausted after this run of games they've been on. I think that's clearly a factor here. But the lack of creativity on either side of the ball is a huge concern for me. Their offensive philosophy is, hey, Jalen, you've got A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. Just go do something. And as you've seen with the 49ers, you can have great players and also scheme them into amazing situations. The Eagles haven't done any of that. And while those guys are putting up numbers, it feels just like if they don't hit a big play, they're not moving the ball. And then they put themselves in a position where a turnover can just cripple them. They need to get back to running the football more effectively. I'm not one of those, just give the ball to DeAndre Swift 25 times, but they've got to get back to running it more effectively. And I wonder if that game against Minnesota, where DeAndre Swift ran all over him in week 2 this year, is going to serve as a blueprint against Seattle, a run defense that can be attacked. I expect a good game for DeAndre Swift this week.
What about when Seattle has the ball?
We'll see if Geno Smith plays. The Eagles' corners, especially Darius Slay, actually played well last week against Dallas. It's just that the Eagles' front 4 is not getting home. And that's their entire philosophy. Well, our front 4. They're going to have to try to do something against the Seahawks if their front 4 doesn't get home this week. Because if Geno Smith does play, he can pick you apart if you don't pressure him.
He is at FG_Dolan. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod, and I'm stuffed. We're finished.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.